Probably need to say a little bit of a disclaimer to begin with, because I do work for a federal agency and I'm a public servant. So I work for the NOAA, which is, we call it NOAA, but everyone else knows it as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I just want to say that everything I say today is coming from Charlie Henry, native of Louisiana. This is my home as well. I'm going to tell you things that I think might be interested, might put things into scope of how we think and how we work as scientists during emergency response. But I have to add disclaimer that it may not be totally supported by my agency, but it was what I would say whether I had to do that disclaimer or not, because I always talk the way I want to. But anyway, so how do emergencies kind of start from my end? You know, as an emergency responder, as a scientist that actually is on call 24/7 to respond to emergencies, they always happen in the middle of the night. You know, they do. And I don't have the scientific proof that they, to prove my hypothesis, but I do know they usually happen on holidays and late nights, especially if you've been out at a party and had a really good time. You're probably going to get a spill call sometime before morning. So kind of with that in context, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill was a spill we had in the Gulf that impacted all of us in this area. I don't think anyone was not impacted by some way from that oil spill. And this is my area. I live in Baton Rouge, and I covered Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle, and the Mississippi River all the way up to St. Louis. So I had that little, small, quiet piece of the world that I was responsible for. And I loved it. I mean, I get to do what is in my passion, which is work on environmental issues in my backyard, and who could ask for anything more? Sometime a little after 1 o'clock in the morning, back in April, almost 7 years ago now. So it's almost been 7 years since that incident. I get a call from the Coast Guard, which is pretty typical. Probably would get about 40 to 60 calls in the middle of the night in a typical year of some type of incident going on, whether it was a chemical incident on the river or spill offshore. And they all start pretty much the same way. A young Coast Guard officer on the other end, and he would say something like, in fact, this was his real name. It said, "This is Petty Officer Sylvia, and Mr. Henry, I think we have a problem offshore." And then he pauses. They always pause for a little while. They want to make sure you wake up. And they go, okay, And so you wake up and you go, okay. And he says, we don't have a lot of information. We know there was an explosion. There's a fire. We know that the rig has been evacuated. And at this present time, there's nearly 80 people unaccounted for. And that's really all we knew. We talked a little bit longer, and I was getting ready to go to work on this project. And part of my role at that point in time is start to think through, what we can do to assist. I am the geeky scientist that supports the Coast Guard that are the decision makers. So how can we use science to help us work through these problems? Well, early on, that's not a lot of information, even for smart scientists to work out, because early on in a spill response, no matter what spill response it is, and Deepwater Horizon was no different, the early information is incomplete, it's often wrong, something happened, but that's almost all you know. I usually think about it as this big canvas. I'm a very visual-oriented person, so in my mind, I have this big canvas, and what few facts we have are lightly sketched out in this painting that I'm going to start working on. And one of the things that you have to start to know is that this is not the fault of anyone trying to mislead. It's just you don't know what's going on. There's a lot of information that's passed from person to person, and there's a lot of loss in fidelity, so by the time it maybe got to me, it may be meaningless as well. So I figured if Coast Guard's going to wake me up at a little after 1 o'clock in the morning, well, I'm going to wake up someone else, So I had a feeling there was some issues on this. If nothing else, I knew that we could assist with some of maybe looking at the search and rescue, because the number one priority on a spill response like this is protection of public life, of human life. That's the number one role. And so the number one mission the Coast Guard was doing in that early part of the night was trying to save lives, the people that got off any way they could off that burning rig in those different pods, those capsules, into the Gulf of Mexico and were floating around. So I called Glenwood Abashi in Seattle, Washington. He's one of our physical oceanographers to kind of start setting up the model so that we could, integrate, the ocean currents and the weather and the winds to kind of have an understanding of the environment offshore. And this is about 80 miles offshore. And then I got in the car. Well, actually, I got dressed first. So I didn't go immediately to the car. And drove down to Morgan City, Louisiana, because that was the captain of the port zone that was responsible for this incident. And at that time, we still didn't have a lot of information. And dealing with uncertainty is kind of like something we do in emergency response. This wasn't my first oil spill. In fact, at that time, I think I've been chasing oil spills for 25 years. And you learn to embrace, I don't think become comfortable with uncertainty, but you become not uncomfortable with uncertainty. And you have ways you start to ask questions and start to put things together and manage the incident in something we call minimum regret so we don't make stupid mistakes. And so we were working through that. And one of the real challenges that we had with the Deepwater, and it's really the tragedy of the events, is that often we would have much better information within the first few hours. But tragically, those that really knew what was going on actually perished in that explosion. 11 individuals lost their lives. So we were really struggling to find out what was going on. And it wasn't until throughout the morning that we started to get a better understanding of what events led up to that situation and what was happening. So that was kind of my first introduction to the Deepwater Horizon. It was not my first oil spill, but it started like many others. But it had, even at that time, feelings that something very big associated with it. I mean, you look at the pictures that you probably saw from the news that morning of this semi-submersible fully engaged in flames, and not a lot you can do. One of the other things you learn about emergency responses, sometimes I call them, because as a scientist, we're always trying to learn something during each incident. They're often unplanned and uncontrolled scientific experiments. You really have no control over a lot what's going on. You're responding to it. You're trying to deal with the issues. You're trying to protect the public, ensure the safety of the responders, protect the environment, and protect property. But you have a lot of limitations on what you can do, and especially on an event that was like the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So what do I do is during oil spills or chemical spills or for the agency I work for? Well, if you ask my daughter would say, oh, Dad flies around in helicopters and tells people how to clean up oil spills. And she'll probably go, oh, and he gets to go really cool places like Alaska and the Galapagos Islands and see really cool things like giant lizards, you know. And that is probably true in some ways, because I've had a lot of opportunities in my career working with NOAA, actually even starting at Louisiana State University when I was under contract to NOAA, but traveling all over the world and being involved in really interesting things. But I might say it a little bit differently. You know, I'm an environmental scientist, I'm a chemist, I'm a marine scientist. Some people would call me an expert in things like forensic oil chemistry or alternative response technologies, which means I know a little bit about oil and how to clean up oil spills. But I hate the word expert. I mean, it's one of the words I really hate a lot. And that's because I read somewhere a long time ago that an expert is a professional that has made every mistake possible in a narrowly defined field. And I haven't made all the mistakes that can be made yet, you know. But that's really part of science. We actually learn by making mistakes, you know. And I actually struggled with that a lot 25, 30 years ago, you know, when I first started chasing spills, especially chemical spills. Those can be scary, you know, when you work with chemical spills. Not that oil spills aren't, but some of the chemicals that are in transit and in large volumes in the U.S. are really hazardous materials. And people die every year from incidents associated with chlorine leaks and other type of chemical incidents. And I expressed that to one of my colleagues, a guy named Jerry Galt, was one of our senior oceanographers at the time. I said, Jerry, you know, this isn't fun, you know. And, you know, my mean fun mean this is actually hard, you know. And I said, Jerry, you know, at the lab, if I make a mistake, you know, I might learn something. Or the worst is I have to spend a little bit of my time repeating the experiment, but no one gets hurt, you know. There's no real loss in cost, nothing. But if you make a mistake on a big emergency, someone could get injured, someone could get killed, and a lot of money occurs when you make mistakes. So I kind of told him I was, you know, feeling a little like being in university was a comfortable place instead of being out on the soil spill. So I was really trying to say. And Jerry says, you know, we reserved, I think he said it, we reserve the right to make mistakes, learn from mistakes, and do a better job next time. And that's part of the role of the scientist that's involved in spills. We're always learning. Every oil spill is different. Another one of my colleagues, Jackie Michelle, always says, I've never been to the same oil spill twice. Because oils are very complex materials, and the environment that we live in is very complex, and in different type of situations, every oil spill is different. And we always learn something that we apply to the future. So that's something to keep in mind, is that, you know, how do you deal with that uncertainty, and how do you deal with how we learn and try to do that. I will say that in my 30-year career responding to spills, I feel pretty confident that I never contributed to any part of the process or making a decision during the response that actually led to someone being injured. I really think that, in fact, why I did this for so long was because I think we really make a difference and actually protect lives and help protect the environment. We wouldn't do that if we didn't think that was the cost, because there's a trade-off to being an emergency science spill responder, and that is you don't always spend as much time at home as other people do. And there's folks in the audience here today that, they're friends of mine, and you miss a lot of fishing trips when you're an emergency spill responder. You miss a lot of birthdays, a lot of important family events because you're on the road. Now, the other positive side of that is you don't do as much housework or yard work when you're an emergency spill responder because you're not there to do it. So that's something to keep in mind. But no, I think that kind of put in context kind of what my job is to fill that canvas out is we really kind of think 5 things. We think about what got spilled, and that's really understanding the chemistry of whatever it is that was spilled in the environment. Where is it going to go? That's that physical oceanography and transport, the wind, the ocean currents, tides, other factors as far as the chemistry that may affect where it goes in the environment. What's going to get hit? Those are those resources at risk. It could be the public, it could be community, could be commercial interest, commercial fisheries, whatever it is that could get hit. And then how is it going to hurt? Once this pollutant gets to it and comes in contact with it, what kind of damage? Is it a toxic response or is it physical damage? You need to understand that. And then the most important question we work on is, okay, what can we do to make it better? How can we help mitigate that response? And those are the 5 elements that mostly my part of the job is involved in responding to a spill, is as that advisor to the people that are in charge to say, how can we best solve these problems and work it out? And I don't do it alone. One of the things that a NOAA Scientist Support Coordinator, which was my title, does, he brings on scene the best people to help work through these problems. Because I know what I know, which is I don't know a whole lot about everything. You bring the people that have that knowledge. And that includes local scientists from universities, as well as colleagues within NOAA to help solve these problems. So oil spill response, and I'm already being too talkative, but oil spill response, another thing is that people say, oh, you must have a really fun job. And I say, I wouldn't use the word fun. I mean, even where we stand today, during Hurricane Katrina, when my office was actually just down the street during Hurricane Katrina, there's nothing you can say was fun about that response. I responded to, I responded to Kuwait oil well fires. And while that might have been exciting, I don't think you'd call it fun when you're hanging around, walking around the desert, setting up sampling stations, and you look down and you find unexploded cluster bombs and minefields and other things. It makes life exciting, but it's not necessarily fun. Mostly, emergency spill response is a lot of work, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of waiting to get ready to go home. And that's what we do because we think we make a difference. We really, the people that you should see the passion in the people that I work with. They really think that it's important what they do. And they don't just think it, they know it's important. And, it's really hard sometimes. You'll hear talks about other folks that, about oil spills. There is nothing good happens during an oil spill. I used to think about it as getting involved in a car accident. You get involved in a car accident, whether it's your fault or someone hits you, are you happy? Is anyone ever happy? No. No one's ever happy during an oil spill. People are always angry, they're upset. So why would I want to spend 30 years of my career going to work in a job that most people are going to be angry? If you didn't feel like you were making a difference, you wouldn't do it. Kind of closing up a little bit, I say that I never regretted any part of this job, and I've had super experiences, and I'd love to tell you a lot more stories, but I'll end up with kind of one story during the Deepwater to kind of bring back that around since we're here in New Orleans. About 6 or 7 weeks into the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, I slept in one morning. I admit, I got really tired, and I'd been working, long days and not even always coming home at night, but usually I made it to my house in Baton Rouge most nights and would sleep and get up about 5:30 every morning so I could make a 7 o'clock meeting either in Roberts or in New Orleans for the morning Command and General Staff meetings, which is a meeting I was required to be at. And one morning in May, it's about the 22nd, in fact, it was the 22nd of May, I remember it well now. I didn't, my wife wakes up and she shakes me up and said, honey, you must have overslept because it's almost 7 o'clock. And I said, no. I slept in on purpose, and really I was just exhausted. I needed to sleep in. And she says, oh, honey, you remembered it was our anniversary. Well, that's how I know it was the 22nd of May. But the other part of it is, I didn't know what day of the week it was, to be honest. But The other part of emergency spill response is sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. I said, yes, honey, I do. It's our anniversary. So, and with that, I will pass it to our next speaker. And thank you very much.